Welcome everybody to this meeting of the Environment and Climate Change Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Can I just remind everybody that this meeting is being broadcast live via YouTube, so please turn your microphones on when speaking and turn them off when finished, and the video will be available on YouTube afterwards the meeting. So this is the first meeting of this new council year, so we have a new member, Mrs. Seaton, so welcome to the committee, Mrs. Seaton, and then welcome back Mr. Payne as the Cabinet Lead Member, and welcome back to all the others of you that were on the committee previously. So the first item on the agenda is appointment of chairman, and at the annual meeting of the County Council held on 17th of May, Mr. Mark Frisbee was nominated as chairman-elect to the committee. Can I have a proposer and seconder that Mr. Frisbee be nominated chair? Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Do we have a seconder?
Thank you. Second that.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. Everybody happy with that? Thank you very much. So I will now hand over to Mr. Frisbee to be chair for the 2023-24 year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ewan, and a very good afternoon, colleagues. This afternoon, Wednesday, the 7th of June. I would like to move forward now the election of deputy chairman, if that's okay. And for that, I would like to nominate Mr. Dan Harrison, if I may. Thank you.
I'd like to second that, please.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All agree, thank you. I'd like to propose the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of March 2023 are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Are we agreed, colleagues? Agreed. Thank you. Item number 4, question time. I have received no questions from the public at this time. Item number 5, questions asked by members under Standing Order 7 brackets 3 and 7 brackets 5. I have received no questions from members. Item number 6, to advise of any other items which I, the chairman, have decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda. I have not been notified of any urgent items. Item number 7, declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Does any member have any interest that they wish to declare?
I've got a minor interest on item 11 as a director of a company owning a small wildlife area, a wildlife benefit called Chestnut Grove Wildlife Conservation.
Very nice, Mr. Hunt, thank you. Okay, item number 8, declarations of the party whip in accordance with overview and scrutiny procedure rule 16. Do members have any declarations? Thank you. Item number 7, presentation of petitions under Standing Order 35. No petitions have been received. Item number 10, we go to our first report, which relates to biodiversity enhancements in Leicestershire County Parks and is available in your packs, colleagues, on pages 9 to 12. And I'm going to invite Director of Corporate Resources, Mr. Richard Hunt, Head of Country Parks, who is joining us online from London, I believe, to present this report. A very good afternoon to you, Richard.
Good afternoon, everybody, and apologies I'm not able to be with you in person this afternoon. The paper before the committee today gives an overview of the work of the Country Parks Service over the past year or so, particularly in the area of biodiversity enhancements. As members will no doubt expect, our work in this area is incredibly varied across our 18 country park sites that we manage across Leicestershire. But in order to give some sort of coherence to it for the purposes of the meetings today, we've structured the paper kind of within the main habitat groupings that people can expect to see on our parks. So that's why it's broken down into woodland, wetland, heathland, and so on. And I suppose I wanted to start by kind of saying, obviously, behind all of this is a multitude of day-to-day pieces of work that all contribute to enhancing biodiversity. And I'm really proud proud of the work that our team of a dozen highly skilled rangers do across the county council, working on our parks, supported by well over 100 dedicated volunteers, and between them they do so much to ensure our parks are such wonderful spaces for us to be in, and also get that balance right between spaces that are managed for biodiversity but also that have public access and give people that green space that so many people really value. So I have got a few slides, mainly because I thought it would be nice to have some photographs to accompany some of the words within the paper. As we set out, we've got about 18 parks, and we cover just under 0.25% of the area of Leicestershire as a country park. Our sites vary enormously, both in terms of their size, but also in terms of the status that they hold. So 3 of our sites are sites of special scientific interest, but also we've got local nature reserves, parks on former reclaimed coalfields, parks in reasonably urban settings, somewhere like Snibston, and parks in some of the most remote parts of the county. So move to the first of the areas we talked about in the paper, which is our work around managing woodland habitats. And this is probably one of our biggest pieces of work we're embarking upon. We're now commencing managing our woodland under a countryside stewardship woodland improvement scheme, which means we're receiving funding from central government for managing our woodlands for the benefit of biodiversity. So we're promoting this excellence in silviculture. Part of that is thinning our woodlands. So over the next few years, we will actually be seeing some trees coming out of our parks, although we're planting a great deal of trees everywhere. Apologies, I seem to have a school visit behind me in the place where I am. We're also going to be thinning some of our woodland plantations. And this is all about giving our trees kind of almost like more space to breathe, if you like, so that means they will grow better, and they'll be able to support a better variety of biodiversity within them. So this was some of the work that took place last year up at Sarah's Wood, and you can see there a group of rangers and volunteers doing some of the woodland management, and then the fruits of their labours being taken away by forwarder, and the timber will either be sold, sometimes it goes for wood fuel, or for wood chip to be used in biomass boilers and things like that. So a variety of things, but all that contributes towards the better management of our woodlands. We've also installed a large number of habitat boxes across our sites, again making sure that while sometimes we're going to be removing some woodlands, we're making it so it's the best possible environment for biodiversity to thrive. The next sector is grassland, and we're doing some fantastic work right across the county on improving the quality of our grassland for biodiversity. So on the right, you can see our volunteers hand raking the wildflower meadows at Watermead, and managing meadows for grassland, as I'm sure the committee are aware, is a time-consuming and quite labour-intensive process. But as you can see from the photographs on the left, it really, really does pay the dividends with the quality of grassland you've got there compared to what we might otherwise see. And we've been really fortunate to have some funding from the Trent Rivers Trust via Botanica and the World Wildlife Fund to enable us to restore some meadows, and also to create some new wildflower meadows at Watermead. And we've also got ambitious schemes in the pipeline for grassland improvements at Market Bosworth Country Park, which could see up to 12 hectares going into a wildflower scheme. And there's also other small wildflower meadows managed by our rangers and volunteers right across our sites. Heathland is the next category we've put down, and our kind of one of our crown jewels of country parks is Beacon Hill, and the heathland there is an incredibly fragile but important habitat within the county, this lowland heathland environment. And the photograph up at the top gives a beautiful shot of the Jules Hill area at Beacon Hill, which is we're looking over towards Jules Hill, it's fair to say. This is an area where we've been piloting restricting public access for a small part of the year, when we are aiming to encourage ground nesting birds on the site and also give the heathland space to improve and regenerate. So there is some grazing continuing there with our rare breed livestock that we have at Beacon Hill, but we're just restricting the public for a small amount of time. And over the period of this pilot, we're assessing it each year with ecologists who are doing surveys, so we can see the effects that this is having. And there's some really encouraging information coming out of that. But obviously, the heathland at Beacon Hill is really quite extensive, and visitors to the site will love being able to go and see our livestock, particularly our cows on the heathland. They're not there because we're trying to be farmers or something like that. They're there for a really important biodiversity benefit, which is they're a really critical part of managing that heathland as well as we can. And then the image to the bottom left is another of our smaller bits of heathland, which is at Bagworth. And Bagworth Heath, on the reclaimed colliery there was some heathland that was planted up when the park was first established. And this was the volunteers going through earlier this year, removing some of the woodland growth that had grown up in that heathland so that it will thrive over the coming years. Wetlands were the next category that we looked at, and our main wetlands are at Watermead, where we now have some of the largest reed beds in the county. Reed beds are particularly challenging environment to manage because the natural progression that you see is from open water through to reed bed, and then if not managed and cut, it will rapidly return to woodland. And we're aiming to keep expanses of open water and expanses of reed for the biodiversity benefits that brings with the migratory birds that use Watermead in tremendous numbers. We've been really fortunate over the last few years that we've invested in working with a contractor who brings a fantastic amphibious reed harvesting machine that can work through our reed beds at a far greater rate than we ever can with our rangers and volunteers. So that's enabled us to do much more proactive management of the site, which should put it in really good shape for the years to come. And then the final one is our freshwater management. And here over the past year, we've been doing a fair amount of pond management. This is at Snibston and at Donington Le Heath. So we've been aiming to open up some of our ponds, remove some of the overgrown vegetation to create more space for biodiversity to be able to thrive in there. So these ponds had got very, very choked over the years. So we've been spending some time improving the habitat conditions there. And it's worth saying all of this would not be possible were it not for the volunteers we work with. The ranger team is very small. They're incredibly dedicated. They work extraordinarily hard, but they would be able to do nothing like the volume of work they undertake without the many volunteers we have working with us. And this gives you a indication of, I suppose, the variety of tasks volunteers carry out, ranging from litter picking through to installation of bird boxes, and then some quite significant bits of carpentry. So actually these rails for bridges at Market Bosworth at the stew ponds there were created by one of our volunteer groups that does much of our woodwork, and a phenomenal piece of craftsmanship there. So we really are indebted to our volunteers and the work that they carry out to make our country parks such fantastic places to be able to visit, but also such fantastic places that biodiversity can thrive in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. That was a refreshingly reassuring and refreshingly positive report that we've got there. And I think inadvertently, colleagues, we had a little insight into the 2024 County Council calendar with some beautiful photographs as well. Just one question from myself. Delighted to see that we've got 100 volunteers. Where can volunteers access these kind of projects? Is it widely available on the website, or how do we pick up the volunteers that we have?
So obviously we list all of our volunteering opportunities on the website, rather than we tend to have sort of specific volunteer days on each of our sites, which makes it more straightforward to manage. But we always welcome applications from people who are interested in becoming volunteers, and often there's bespoke opportunities for people who have particular skills that we want to have. But it really is a great volunteering opportunity in that you can join in with very little skill at all. You can be part of a group, and we'll be giving you the training and things on the job. So people either apply normally just via the Country Parks website, and then the rangers will pick it up and kind of triage it through whoever the most appropriate part park is, depending on someone's expertise, where they'd like to volunteer, location-wise, things like that.
Certainly getting behind that. Question from Mrs. Page. Thank you.
Thank you, and it is a very relative short one. Thank you, Richard. It's given me a great, fantastic overview of what we've actually got, and I think we have to be thankful for our volunteers, because no doubt not only does it promote our health and well-being agenda, but it also saves us a great deal of money. However, my question is a little bit off the wall now, and it relates to the next agenda item 11, the strategy. So we now got all of this, we've got an overview, what we have got. How does that fit into the next item on the agenda? Does that is that a part that we can use to look at, what is it called? Hang on, give me a minute, I've got a blunt moment. The local nature recovery strategy and responsible authority status. So how does that fit in? Do we transfer that? Do we use all of these and enhance them and fit them in the strategy?
We're certainly expecting that Country Parks plays an appropriate and I suspect fairly significant role in the County Council's ambitions in this area, and certainly local nature recovery strategy is one part, I know, of a whole raft of initiatives that will be coming through as part of the Environment Act, and I think there's real opportunity for County Council land holdings within that, and I think we're really excited by the opportunities that are afforded by some of these incoming changes as a result of the new legislation that's coming through. And I really think they have great opportunity for improving biodiversity on many sites around the county.
Are you happy with that? Mr. Bolter, if you will, thank you.
Thank you, yes. My memory serves me correct. The government were going to ban the use of wood-burning stoves. I'm not sure when that's coming in, but that's what they were going to do, ban wood-burning stoves. Now, most of the trees that we're felling are softwood, which give off a tiny amount of pollutants in the atmosphere when you burn softwoods. That's why hardwoods are always recommended. So how does that fit in with our overall environmental strategy? If they do ban wood-burning stoves and we're selling timber for their use, how's that going to affect us? And also, I know we use it for our burning boilers and things, fine, but how much money do we make out of selling the timber? And is it cost effective to burn it rather than sell it? Where is it shown on the figures, the income for selling timber? I've never seen it.
So a couple of points from that. Firstly, it wouldn't be fair to say that it's predominantly softwoods that we'd be thinning. It will be a tremendous variety. So, for example, across a number of our sites, we'll be having to harvest ash as a result of ash dieback within the county. So it really will be a mixture of hard and softwoods. The rules over wood burning stoves are changing all the time. Certainly, a lot of my understanding of it is it relates to the appropriate drying of the wood to be used in those stoves, and it will depend upon the nature of the timber as to what it's being sold for. So a small amount of it will be being sold for wood fuel. Other things will be used for other things within the timber industry. But the objective from all of this isn't about making money from timber sales. The objective from all of this is about biodiversity enhancements of our country parks, and so that has to be over and above that's the objective of the Countryside Stewardship Woodland Improvement Grants. There may be some benefit to the council from timber sales, but I expect that probably going to be cost neutral overall. But really the bigger objective from this is about improving the health of the trees in our woodlands on our country parks.
Happy, Mr. Bolter?
I'm never happy, Chair. You should know that.
I do know that.
I understand what is being said. Just concerns me that we're working together with the government on the agenda for cutting air pollution. I hate to think that we're using our resources to actually increase air pollution rather than reduce it.
Okay, I think we've also clarified that we're not trying to set up a timber yard as such. Mr. Payne, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and congratulations. Welcome to your new role. Just in response to Mr. Bolter's question, my understanding is that there were plans to ban wood burning stoves from 2027. I think that was the date it was due to kick in. But recently, in 2023, I believe the government, through their environment implementation strategy, have confirmed that there is no provision to ban wood burning stoves from 2027. So whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, we'll just say, as far as the legislation is concerned, I do not think that ban's going to come into force. So that might answer that. In response to Mrs. Page's questions, I just want to say, for my part, this clearly, Richard is a part of the corporate resources team here and does a very good job at managing the team that looks after our country parks. And I think the report is evidence of the great work that's going on. But it just shows how important that this environment agenda is here at Leicestershire County Council and indeed nationally. What we're talking about here in response to Mrs. Page's question is legislation. It's that important that the government of the day have legislated through the Environment Act. And this biodiversity enhancement, what's particularly pleasing, apart from the great work that's going on and obviously the positive benefits that has for Leicestershire residents, is that we are setting the standards, because in legislation there is now a requirement for a 10% increment in biodiversity through every planning permission that's permitted. And the fact that our country parks team and the Leicestershire County Council have already set about improving the biodiversity of our country parks is very good. And actually, from our perspective, we're practicing what we preach. If we have a responsibility through our development control and at the borough and district councils through as planning authorities to make sure that that 10% increase is put into effect. Obviously, there's no planning considerations at bay here, but we are in actual fact getting on and improving the biodiversity of our assets, and that's particularly pleasing.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Mr. Hunt, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, many thanks, Richard, for a superb roundup of the activities going on, and it's a credit to you and your team and the enthusiasm that you provided. Also, thanks very much for your work on the catering service, which is nothing to do with the meeting today, but is absolutely excellent. My question is about those about the sites that we have dispensed with over recent years. Example, the altar stones at Markfield. Don't know if that's one that you know. And there was a period during which the authority was trying to diverse itself off some of these smaller sites, largely to either voluntary groups or the Leicestershire Wildlife Trust. Question is, are we in touch with the people and the various organisations who have taken over previously owned Leicestershire sites? And is that ambition to divest ourselves of smaller sites still there? Or are we now focused very firmly on what we've got and what we hold? Thanks very much.
So on the two halves of that, we certainly do have ongoing contact with neighbouring organisations who manage some of these sites, including the Wildlife Trust, as Mr. Hunt has referenced there. So yes, we do, and certainly we work with a variety of landowners across the county, offering them advice and support on managing their sites. So a great example of that is the work that the team at Beacon Hill do with local landowners down in the Woodhouse Ease area who are managing a meadow there, and we've been loaning them cows for a period to help them with their management there. So we are always happy to help and support with advice as much as we can. In terms terms of divesting of other sites, members will be aware that the Country Park strategy was agreed back in 2019, and that didn't set out within that any ambition to be divesting of any other sites in accordance with the terms of that strategy at the time.
Well, every day's a school day. I didn't realise we loaned out cows. So fascinating. Any more questions, comments, colleagues? Ethan, thank you.
Thank you. And I probably should have declared an interest in Watermead Country Park, because that's where I am found daily, and even went for a paddle the other day to try and get my dog back. But Watermead Country Park is so well managed with the varied habitats on there, but you've also carefully managed it, and it's inviting to the visitors. And I mentioned Watermead because, as I say, it's the only one I go to, but it's got such an interesting trail to allow children to join in with the environment around them. Beacon Hill and places like that have got that inbuilt with rocks and hills and this, but it's had to be planned into Watermead, and it's been done very sensitive and not impacted on the habitats that are there. So I would like to say thank you for managing my back garden for me, and carry on. Thank you.
What a refreshingly positive start to this meeting that's been. Richard, thank you very much. I don't think we have any additional questions here or any additional statements. We just wish you a safe journey back from London, and we hope you managed to avoid the school trip that's going on behind you. But thank you. It was an informative and very positive report and update. Thank you. So that was Richard Hunt, Head of Country Parks, and now we're moving on to item number 11, which our next report is our local nature recovery strategy, and it's in our packs on pages 13 to 42, and I believe Anne Carruthers, Director of Environment and Transport, will present this report for us. So thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Chair. And I have my colleague James O'Brien, our Environment Strategy Manager, with me as well on this item. The report advises you of a new statutory duty that the County Council has in relation to local nature recovery strategies. The Environment Act 2021 requires local government to produce these strategies. They are spatial strategies that identify the nature priorities for the area in question. And for us, that's Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland area, and along with that, with actions that will contribute to the government's national 30 by 30 target, which is in effect protecting 30% of the UK's land for nature by 2030. So it's about really identifying priorities for nature, for activities and actions to enhance and protect those areas. So very much just related back to that last item and Mrs. Page's question there about the role of country parks. I would very much expect to see our country parks be a key element of this strategy in terms of areas that we want to identify, protect, prioritise, etc. for activities. So absolutely related. The government's currently putting in place the national framework that will support us in preparing these strategies. And as part of that, we as the County Council have been designated as responsible authority for the Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland local nature recovery strategies. There's going to be 48 of these across the country, so making up England, spatial areas. And as I say, for us, we've been designated that responsible authority. Just I'll highlight one correction in the report, if I may, Chair, and that's under paragraph 14. We've stated there that DEFRA wrote to us in mid-May to actually delegate or designate us as this responsible authority. At the time of writing of the report, and bear in mind we have to write these quite a few weeks in advance of the committee, that was correct. DEFRA had said to us that they will write to us in mid-May to tell us that. They haven't actually done that yet. And as of the latest, which I understand from James yesterday, they have advised us it won't be within the next 2 weeks, but they still intend to write to us and tell us that. We don't anticipate any change in the situation, that we as a county council will be the responsible authority. From what we know about that role of a responsible authority, it's about leading the development of the strategy to make sure it is put in place for that spatial area we're covering, the LLR area. Paragraph 15 in the report gives you a bit more detail in relation to that role and the nature of it. In the interim, while we're waiting on more information coming out of government, we have been making progress with our partners, and a steering group has been set up, and that involves the upper tier authorities as well as the Environment Agency, Forestry Commission, National Forest Company and District Authority representatives. Work's focused on collecting the data because we have to identify these areas, etc. So the initial bit is understanding our local area and where we want to prioritise and identify within the strategy. So as I say, it's been focusing on data collection and identifying possible nature opportunities and priorities within our area. It will be a significant piece of work, and the strategy itself will be developed over the next 18 months. Part of that will include a consultation, public consultation, and we do envisage we will come back at least once, but probably more, key milestones to this committee, as we undertake that exercise to further develop the strategy. Key features of the regs and the guidance that are out today, they're set out in paragraph 13 of your report to give you a bit more flavour about the process itself that we'll undertake to put it in place. And actually, also probably quite importantly as well, how a local nature recovery strategy will fit within the existing planning framework, i.e. because it is a statutory document, it will have to be considered and it will be given weight within the local planning system, etc. So that fleshes out a wee bit more just those interrelationships for you. In terms of resources to undertake this work, the County Council, because we're the responsible authority, will receive new burdens funding for taking on that role and driving that forward. The allocation we're anticipating is 328,000 over a 2-year period this year and next financial year. We've already been allocated for just under 49,000 over the last 2 years. The bit I would point out, however, is to date, there's been no details or indication that there will be any additional money to actually deliver the strategy. The money we're given under the new burdens is purely to put it in place because there's substantial partnership work, the data collection, the consultations, etc., etc. It's not for the actual delivery of the strategy. And it seems to be that the government expects that will be through existing other mechanisms, such as the environmental land management scheme that's in place. So again, we'll be in challenging times, to see how effectively and efficiently and how quickly we are able to make progress on that, depending on how we access other mechanisms to help deliver on the strategy itself. The just final points then, if I may, Chair, this report was taken to Cabinet in May because, again, understanding the authority's role as an responsible body here, responsible authority in delivering this strategy and the burdens that puts on the County Council. We bring it today basically for information for the committee and also for comment, but also then to set the context because we envisage bringing further reports as we develop the strategy and would seek the committee's input, as that progresses over time. I'll pause, Chair, there.
Thank you, and thank you, James, for joining us today. Just one thing before I actually pass over to Rosie. We talked about item number 14, which is the delay in the letter that's been sent out from DEFRA. Apart from reputational sort of damage to us, is there any actual impact that might have? What will that mean in real terms? Does it mean that the project's been stalled or we're going to be on the back foot?
I'll start, and then maybe James can answer any detail. I mean, from my perspective or an understanding, no, it makes no difference. They've indicated that's what we're going to do. I'm not sure the machinations of governments and approvals that, you know, perhaps are holding that up. But as far as we're concerned, we're still getting on with the work to, you know, that steering group to pull together the data to, you know, start that long process of putting the strategy in place. It's only if we get any indications from government that there'll be some different thinking contrary to, you know, they've indicated to us before, such as us no longer being the responsible authority or them completely looking to revamp the guidance and regs around this. There's no indications of that at the moment. So I'd say no change really, no real implications. You know, it only if something significantly different comes out of the woodwork.
And no reputational damage?
Not at the moment. I think if anything, it's only really on government as well, because, you know, they had indicated earlier that, you know, they would put something out to confirm the position. It doesn't seem that there should be anything significant holding that up, so we're not quite sure why. You know, we're just in a holding pattern on that one. But as I say, no implications from our perspective at the moment in terms of continuing with the work the way we had anticipated taking it forward.
Thank you, Anne. James, is there anything you wanted to add before I go to Mrs. Page?
Yeah, just to confirm that as things stand, based on the current delay, there's no impact on what we're doing. We've just gone out to recruitment for a project manager to take on the work. So if there was a further delay, we might have to delay the appointment of that post and so on, but we are proceeding with the work where we can and how we can.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, James. Mrs. Page.
Oh, when I read this, it made my head hurt because it's going to be such an enormous piece of work. And I have got so many questions. It's unbelievable. But I will try to condense myself. Now, my first question is, I understand we're having to produce a strategy, but then how will it manifest itself? Because it keeps saying in simple terms, how are you going to measure the outcomes? And, you know, because there are 1,000,001 things in there. There is measuring biodiversity, there is the planning, and there is even the farming aspect. So how can you see you're going to put it all into manageable, you know, outcome focused, you know, talk me around that. Now, my second question is, yes, we are supposed to get funding, but the funding is only over 2 years, and it's another government ploy. They give us a little bit, but introducing and putting a huge cost burden onto us, because then later on in the report, I see that the strategy is supposed to be 3 to 10 years, and it keeps having to be. So, you know, how do you see the funding and how do you see that looked at? Because I can see once a strategy is produced, it keeps having to monitored, it keeps having to be regurgitated. So it's an ongoing commitment. So that's question number 2.
Can I, Mrs. Page, can we,
yeah,
I think it's fair and reasonable that we address questions at a reasonable pace, otherwise we'll get lost
2
in
more,
the...
and then I finish. I've got so many, but I try to keep it to 4. So my next question is that how do you see it manifesting onto the farming community, because they're also doing biodiversity and we've got no authority over that. So, you know, I think it's a little bit of wishful thinking and trying to enforce something onto a farming community, which, you know, so quick answer on that. But my main point, question number 4, it is when we're talking about biodiversity and losing land and whatever else, it should go right back to planning. Now, how you're working with the districts, I know you said it's going to have to be worked into local plans, but it actually should go down furthermore. It should be attached to every planning application. Like we've got highways commons, maybe we should have biodiversity commons, because at the end of the day, what you will have is a developer comes along, he says, we're going to have 50 houses, and and you know, never mind the biodiversity. So, and if we're looking at my area where logistics have taken over 540 acres of good farmland, where there were agricultural, archaeological remains, and we're just putting warehouses on that. So how are we going to dovetail all of this? How can we enforce it, and how can we make sure that that this really has got legs, and that isn't on building on our good work Richard Hunt already does, where we are actually getting into the development, into the crux of things, and making this a sustainable part of planning applications. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. Page. I'm not entirely sure if that was questions or a speech you just gave there.
Oh.
So there's 4 encyclopedically large parts to that. Succinctly, what I got from it is how are you going to do it? Where's the money going to be coming from? And what's the impact? I think I'm about right, Mrs. Page.
And planning, how are we going to make that sustainable? Because I think that is the most important thing, and the farming community.
And at a guess, I would suggest, before I hand over to the officers, that some of that will be answered by the post that's yet to be filled that Mr. O'Brien alluded to earlier. Mr. O'Brien, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the questions. They're all valid questions, and they're questions we've asked ourselves, so I can attempt to answer them. Some of the answer I will give is based on the theory of what's meant to happen, based on what the legislation says and what the regulations and guidance says. So sometimes what is said in the regulations may not happen in reality, so I'll just put that kind of house warning with it. But in terms of your first question around how the strategy will manifest itself, okay, so just going back to the basics of what the strategy is. It is a high-level spatial strategy which will set out at a landscape scale. So I won't say what will happen in this field and that field and whatever else. It'll say at a landscape scale, based on all the evidence that is gathered and the data, and talking to the farmers and talking to the landowners and talking to people who use the countryside and talking to Richard and talking to different people. What are the nature priorities for the area? Based on those priorities, what are the technical term is proposed measures we can undertake across the geography to help protect and improve the biodiversity and meet other environmental objectives around climate change, around carbon, around air quality that Councillor Hunt mentioned earlier on. So it's not just about biodiversity. Biodiversity is the priority, but we are also expected to what's called stack other environmental benefits on top of the biodiversity benefits. So benefits around climate change, adapting to climate change, air quality, river quality, health and well-being is also another broader aspect of this piece of work. The regulations and the guidance, etc., do not require us to develop an action plan. We only are required to develop a strategy. But the logical next step is to develop an action plan. That's where we'll have to get into the detail of some of the questions you've asked. So I can't give you definitive answers at this point. So if I move on to your second question around the funding, as was already said, we have been we've been informed that we will get funding for the next 2 years to develop the strategy. We've also been informed that we will get money when the strategy needs to be reviewed in 3 to 10 years' time. The Secretary of State will decide when that review period will take place, with the expectation that all 48 strategies will be reviewed at the same time. Part of the reason for that broad spectrum of time between 3 and 10 years is because they also want to make changes to the planning system to better align. They're trying to align 3 things at the moment. They're trying to align the review of the National Environmental Improvement Plan with the review of the local nature recovery strategies, with the reviews of all the local plans that happen across the country. So that's why it's going to take them a while to get all those ducks lined up, basically. While we have no indication at this point that we will get money for the management and administration of the ongoing delivery of the local nature recovery strategy, we have raised this concern with DEFRA at several meetings, and all they can say to us at the moment is the reason we've only been given 2 years' money is because the current funding cycle at a government level only allows them to commit monies up until the end of the Parliament. So we expect, and they've said, the government has committed to provide what's called new burdens funding to local government for this work. So all they can do is promise there will be money, but not tell us how much or for how long. We, as Anna said in the report, it is expected that some of the delivery of actual projects on the ground will be funded through what was mentioned earlier, biodiversity net gain. So developers will have to pay money towards the 10% net gain on any development sites. So that funding will be used to fund some of the work to improve biodiversity on the ground. Also, through the environmental land management scheme, you mentioned the farmers. So farmers are going to be encouraged to change their farming practices to be more sustainable and move to more regenerative farming solutions potentially. So they will get paid for doing public good on their land, including public good towards nature, separately to DEFRA through the replacement to the Common Agricultural Policy. Okay. Now there are some concerns around how much money has been allocated to that and how well that will be achieved. So this is why we have to work very closely, hand in glove, with landowners, including farmers, in how we develop the strategy and how it's going to be delivered. And so that answers the kind of farming question as well.
Sorry, and I assume we're also working with our property department, because we've got plenty of farms there. So that is a start there.
Absolutely. So we will have to work with a whole wide range of stakeholders, both internal stakeholders, including colleagues in country parks, property, etc., as well as when we met with DEFRA and they informed us of the money, they said part of the giving of the money is the expectation we will try to engage with all landowners and farmers in the area. So I know we will try, and I'll mention something else later on. So in terms of planning, so this is one of the complex areas. So in terms of the regulations and the guidance, the local nature recovery strategy is meant to inform where biodiversity net gain takes place. The slight problem is that biodiversity net gain is happening before the local nature recovery strategy is developed. So government are producing some guidance, we're waiting for that, on how that anomaly will be managed in the short term before we get things aligned in a better position. Again, under the regulations and under the Environment Act, there is an element called the extended biodiversity duty, which places additional duties on local authorities and other government authorities to have regard for biodiversity and nature in how they deliver their services. So that duty will put an obligation on local planning authorities to have regard for local nature recovery strategies in their planning process, planning systems, but also how they manage their own land, manage their parks, etc., as well as on us as the county council. Again, we're waiting on, as I say, guidance on how all that's going to happen in practice, and there will be a transition period, as I said, where things don't quite align, and we'll have to kind of struggle through that, I would imagine, for a number of years, and hopefully then that will get us to a point where we can get things working better together and a more coherent and coordinated approach. In terms of how to enforce, well, some of it potentially could be done through the legislation, because that's a legal duty on local authorities. So somebody like the Wildlife Trust could bring a case against the local authority for not meeting its biodiversity duty. So that's it. Through the court system is one way, or through the environmental protection, what's it called, the new environmental body that government has established, that they could also, if there was obvious evidence that a local authority was not complying with its duties around biodiversity, they could bring a case against them as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
You two can invite us to your next meeting that you have together, if you like. That's fine. Thank you, Mr. O'Brien.
Sorry, Chair, just to help as well, we are organising a members' briefing on local nature recovery strategies on the 20th of June, 4 to 5 o'clock. And we are also holding an information event for landowners and other stakeholders on the 30th of June from 10 to 12. I believe information has been sent out to members through the...
Was that a virtual meeting?
Both virtual meetings, yes.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
Mrs. Page, are you satisfied with the answers Mr. O'Brien's provided? Good. So are we. Mr. Hunt.
Thanks very much. Yeah, one of my favourite times of day is 5:45 in the morning when I listen to Farming Today, and I can hear all about these arguments back and forth, and it's quite a difficult area, really. And it's I won't say political, but it has got a political element to it because it's replacing the legislation that we had around the EU, and it's sort of post-Brexit. Anyway, my main question, and I'll stick to that, is on paragraph 6, which relates to these spatial data collection that you're making, but particularly the point where you say the map will map the most valuable existing areas of nature, etc., which sounds great, but I'm a bit confused about how the sites will be evaluated to determine which are the valuable existing areas of nature, because looking at the title of the paper and so on, we're talking about nature recovery, which is not quite the same as nature protection, let alone nature management or biodiversity management, and it could refer to the areas that you talked about, particularly farmland and land managed by agriculture, or it could be areas, and I notice the city of Leicester is involved as well. It could be areas of population which have been degraded by development or industry. So I suppose my question is, how will you evaluate which are the ones that are worthy of being most valuable and which perhaps aren't? Because it's a big question, I think. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Chair.
Mr. O'Brien. Thank you, Mr. Hunt. Yep.
Thank you. Yeah. So the starting point is to work with the sites we have already identified as valuable. So that's like our triple SI, sites of significant scientific interest, local wildlife sites, and so on. So that's the starting point. And then we're expected through the process of engaging with various landowners, stakeholders, partners, etc., to identify any other sites we feel collectively are important for different reasons. And then we will have to work collectively as a partnership, as a steering group, to make some decisions around which ones are included within that list. So it's a process. It will be a process, as I say, of using existing data, existing designated sites, and then working with partners, stakeholders, etc., to identify additional ones.
Doesn't answer my question really, which was how you decide that. And it sounds a bit subjective in the way you've described it, but perhaps at a future occasion we can dig down and get some more feedback on that, because I would like to see it as a kind of more democratic choice of in the sense of having a wider view of what the sites should be, rather than simply looking at the triple SIs and so on.
Mr. Hunt, do you mean you'd want it to be more democratic in terms of the project content or the project location?
In terms of the project locations, when I say democratic, I'm just trying to say a wide canvas rather than the usual suspects of triple SIs, Beacon Hill, and that sort of thing.
James?
Yeah, if I come back, there will be a very wide canvas, because there will be an opportunity for landowners to put forward their sites or their pieces of land forward as possible sites to be included within the scope of the strategy. So because farmers may want to give up some of their margins towards nature recovery, so we'd have to map all those and see what does that mean in terms of putting forward what's called a proposed measure at a landscape scale for how that might be done. I'll give you an example that's been put forward by DEFRA is we might have a proposed measure around increasing the number and length of hedges that exist across the geography. So that is just a general measure. It's not going to say which hedges or which fields, whatever else. You know what I mean? So in that situation, subject to getting funding possibly through biodiversity net gain or possibly through environmental land management schemes, those hedges will be put in place. So it's not. There's still a lot of work to be done to identify what's going to actually happen on the ground.
Thank you, James. It sounds like we've got some more unknowns than knowns at the moment. Mr. Bolter, thank you.
Thank you. Yes. A couple of things. Rosie's covered a few of my questions I was going to ask, particularly about the funding. It's always a favourite one for us, isn't it? Give for 2 years and it disappears and use your own receipts. Page 17, item A. The Secretary of State decides the area that each strategy covers. Has he already agreed with our areas yet, or is he has agreed? So that's fixed in stone. And the other one, it's amazing, isn't it? Over a number of years, some years ago, we were paying farmers to take hedges out. Now we're putting them back in again. It's a 10-year cycle, isn't it? This place, another 10 years they'll be taking them out again. But it's interesting that I'm most in favour of putting hedges back. My area, a lot of hedges are removed. It feels bigger for modern machinery to actually work in them, but other areas are taken out just to get the money, and that grieved me immensely.
Do you want to come back on that, or should?
Just as a general comment, I think this is not just happening within the UK, but happening within the EU in terms of a changing in farming policy. There's a general acceptance now that common agricultural policy was not the right policy, and that intensive industrial scale agriculture was not the best for nature or for agriculture and food and so on. So this is part of reclaiming and rectifying those past mistakes.
Don't be pleased in the title actually there, James. Lead member, Mr. Payne, thank you.
Yeah, just a couple of things to add. Firstly, this is, significant. This is legislation, and I don't think anybody should be under any doubt of the commitment of, I think, the UK to actually improve our nature, improve our biodiversity. We can have debates and arguments as to how best to do that, but the fact that the government have legislated, now we've seen that come through, and the onuses are being put onto authority to develop these strategies, etc., is evidence enough that I think we're going in a positive direction so far as environment and nature is concerned. The second thing I want to say is I think we're in excellent hands. You've just heard the expert knowledge, and we've got officers such as James, who clearly is on top of his game, and we're very grateful to you and your team for doing this work for us. It is the strategy that's being put together. It might take 18 months. We've been given some funding to put that strategy together, but I think we need to distinguish our role. We are the responsible authority here, and we are going to be the responsible authority for putting this strategy together for Rutland, for Leicester, for ourselves. And I think a collaborative approach and a very thorough approach is what's in order here, and I have every confidence that Anne and James and the rest of the team will do an excellent job in that respect for us. And the third thing here, and I just want to put on record, I think Leicestershire County Council, by virtue, we've set this environment panel up. We have a lead member for this. We're ahead of the game, if you like. There'll be a lot of authorities out there that are probably trying to put processes and systems in place to take stock and actually manage this work through. We recognise the importance of it. We recognise the fact that the government have legislated, and whether it be for biodiversity or the Environment Act 2021 or the local nature recovery strategy obligations that we have, and there's going to be plenty more work in this area that we are going to be held to account over. So it's extremely important that we make this central to our operations here at the County Council, which I believe we're in the process of doing. And I take every confidence that we've got quality officers like James who are charged with developing these strategies for us and helping us put them into play in Leicestershire.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Yeah, I couldn't reiterate that enough. Thank you very much. I feel very confident, and I appreciate that this is a project that's in its infancy and it will only grow, but certainly there was a degree of passion in what was presented, and it was an informed response. So thank you, James, and thank you, Anne, for that. Are there any further questions or any further statements? Seaton, thank you.
Thank you. A question, Chair. Lots of the new developments, it's going back to planning and the S106 and the management of many of the new larger developments, the SUs, and them going to different land trusts and different management companies. How closely are we working with those as well, or are they separate entities to us? Is there some sort of dovetail working with the, because the land that they're managing is quite huge in some cases, in some developments, and I wondered whether there was any cross workings on that. Thank you.
I'll try to answer this one. This again is linked to the planning system. So the responsibility for making sure that developers fulfill their commitments linked to biodiversity net gain, because they have to maintain the land, I think for 30 years, I believe, and maintain the biodiversity for 30 years. So they will have to submit plans for how they do that, how they propose to do that. And I believe it'll be up to the planning system to police and monitor that. So the planning system, planners, etc., planning authorities will be one of the key stakeholders we will be engaging with as we develop the local nature recovery strategy. And as I mentioned previously, we're also waiting on the government to release guidance on how it sees the planning system and biodiversity net gain dovetailing into the local nature recovery strategy as well.
Okay, and finally, thank you, Rosie.
Yes. Now, the way I see it, farmers, we all doing our bit already. You know, we have, as county, we're promoting wildlife verges and whatever else. So we're doing a great deal. For me, the most important thing, it is to address the planning, because as we are putting hundreds and hundreds of thousands of houses all the time, and, you know, concreting vast areas, and creating additional or surface water runoff, it is the most important thing to me that this strategy brings forward. So can I ask you how you see the importance within your, well, within what you're doing? Is that working backwards, you know, that you do the planning issues first, or where do you see it fits in, and where do you prioritize the importance of the issues within your strategy? And with that, thank you very much. Wonderful.
I think what Rose says is what takes precedence, the planning or the, thank you.
Yeah, I suppose in terms of what will be in our strategy, it would be wrong of me to preempt that, because we have to go through a process of engagement and involving and listening to the various partners and stakeholders. So the difficulty here is there is lots of things happening at the same time. At the same time as we got local nature recovery strategy, and we got biodiversity net gain, and we got environmental land management scheme, the government is also reviewing the national planning policy framework, and it's through that review they're hopefully going to address the concerns you've raised, in the sense of it's through the planning system we have destroyed the environment in many ways. Okay, so the government has recognized that, and it is trying to come up with solutions to how it addresses that in the planning system going forward. So this is what I said earlier on around we'll have to go through a transition period for several years until all the ducks are lined up in terms of all the bits of the system that need to change and work better together before we can be able to answer that question in detail. But we are conscious of the change that needs to happen, and we will try to embed it into the strategy as best we can.
Thank you, James. Anne?
Just briefly, just to add to that, in addition to what James is saying in terms of that transition period when things are reviewed, like the National Planning Policy Framework, etc., to dovetail these things, I think the thing that I would take a wee bit of reassurance from is the government's made this a statutory strategy. You know, it's a statutory duty for us to produce it, and then it's a statutory document. Now, we get required by government to produce lots of strategies all the time, and very many of those, the vast majority, are not statutory. They don't have a statutory basis. The fact it is statutory is all the difference. It means the existing local plan system has to then give weight to it, and, you know, look at that and take on board what it's saying. So even before we get through the end of a revised national planning policy framework, etc., to understand what the next iteration of the planning system might look like, local planning authorities will have to take on board what the local nature recovery strategy is saying when it is in place and adopted, because it's statutory. So to me, that gives an element of reassurance that, you know, planning cannot go on ignoring the requirements of this. There's statutory duty to do so. So it gives an element of reassurance, although as James says, there is a much longer process in place. It's about embedding. It will be a material considered.
Thank you, colleagues, and thank you, officers. Again, I'm assured we're in very safe and competent hands. So thank you for that, James, and thank you, Anne. Okay, colleagues, item number 12, which is now dates of future meetings. Future meetings of this committee are scheduled to take place on the following dates at the same time, 2 o'clock. Thursday, the 14th of September this year, Thursday, the 2nd of November this year, Thursday, the 25th of January 24, Thursday, the 14th of March 24, Thursday, the 13th of June 24, Thursday, the 12th of September 24, and for this period, Thursday, the 14th of November 24. Sounded like a bingo caller, didn't I, Mrs. Seaton? Mrs. Seaton, thank you. Okay, there we are. I thought you were going to say something witty, Mrs. Seaton. Any other items which the chairman has decided to take as urgent? As stated before, I have no urgent items at this time. Thank you. Item number 14, exclusion of the press and the public. I, as chairman, propose that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the public are excluded for the following item of business on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, and in all circumstances of the case, the public interest in maintaining exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Are we all agreed? Thank you. I'm going to ask you to stop the webcast.